Yep, I'm just trying to load up my slides right now. Sorry, I'm in the middle of a game jam as we're speaking, and I'm like, yeah, I'm in the middle of doing the global game jam right now. I'm working on a small visual novel for that. So, yeah, let's see here. Start that. Can you all see my slides?
Yep, and only your slides, nothing else. It's all yours.
Perfect. Then we shall begin. Hello, everyone, and welcome to What's Your Story? Writing a visual novel from start to finish. This is my second talk for a visual conference, and I want to talk a little about how to write your own visual novel story. So first things first, to those who have not met me before, who am I? And why am I giving this talk? I am Mado. These are the three games I've made: Proto-Violence, Malviolence, and Bad Faith. I began solo developing visual novels in 2016. Hold on, wait. My slides disappeared. There we go. I began solo developing visual novels in 2016. I released my first commercial visual novel in January 2022 with Bad Faith. I made my directorial debut in 2023 with Malviolence and Proto-Violence. Both games earned 70,000 downloads on Steam and itch.io combined. And I held my first visual novel workshop at MICA in 2024. So here's what I'm currently doing. I'm a video-based social media and PR manager for Studio Lawn, and I've been doing this for about 2 years. And I'm currently working on the next Violence series entry. But this does not have to do with anything to do with the presentation, so let's get right into that. I'm going to be talking a bit about proto-violence today because it is my most narratively, I guess, involved project that I've ever worked on. It was the first time I seriously wrote in a writing team, and it's why I'm making it the kind of case study for this presentation today. So this is a sci-fi drama visual novel. It takes about 2 hours to read. It's a kinetic novel with cinematic visuals and partial voice acting. And it was developed in 1 month for the 2023 Spooktober Game Jam. Also, the definitive edition was released on February 18th, 2024 with new scenes and additional voice acting. Anyways, let's get on to the big question. How do I write a visual novel? This question seems really big and scary, and it was really big and scary to me when I first started writing visual novels. I had no idea how to make head or tail of anything in this process. But over the years, as I worked on more and more projects, I eventually got into a routine. And so I'm going to go and share that routine with all of you now. It is a routine I've separated into 6 separate steps. So here are the 6. Step 1, thinking or getting ideas for my story. Step 2, plotting or building the skeleton for my story. Step 3, outlining or fleshing out my story. Step 4, drafting, or actually making my story script. Step 5, redrafting, making my story script better. And step 6, polishing, which is I implement my story into my games engine and then I make final tweaks to it. This is how I personally go about writing my visual novels. You can take or leave any advice I give. I'm simply here to provide an overview. So let's get into a little more detail onto each step of these processes. First things first. The thinking stage, where I get ideas for my story. So first of all, I make a spider diagram for the feelings and ideas that I want in my story. This provides a nice overview of my story, but it also helps me create new ideas and associations with them. They're also quick to make. I can easily make another if I'm unhappy with my previous ideas. So you can see on the right, this is an actual spider diagram I made, not for proto-violence though. This is another story I wrote in 2022. And the key theme of this story was raising a child and single parenthood. So off of that spider diagram, I wanted to explore themes like happiness, fear, and ulterior motives. And off of those, I branched off into more specific feelings. For example, if I go into the fear branch, I look into questions or feelings like, I have no idea what I'm doing, or I'm scared I won't be there for you forever. And off of those, I go into the specific scene ideas or moment ideas that I think I'd like. But you can see how there's this strong sense of like overview, this strong overview of what the entire story of my project might be. And any ideas I could connect together to kind of create a stronger thesis on the whole for the story that I want to tell. Next up is the planning stage, where I actually go about building the skeleton of my story. I turn my spider diagram into a basic plot outline. This is about 3 paragraphs long, and it highlights the main conflicts and climaxes of my story. Referencing existing plot structures can help with making a skeleton, especially if you're a beginner. Common ones include Freytag's Pyramid, which is great for tragedies, The Hero's Journey, which is great for typical adventure stories, and Save the Cat. But my actual piece of advice is that what I found was even more useful was reading and analyzing other people's stories. By doing this a lot, this made me develop an intuition for what I want in my own stories, and conversely, what I don't want. Also, if you're going to do research for any sort of topic in your visual novel, this step would be a good time to start compiling notes. When you're compiling notes, you should keep a separate reference document with links, screenshots, writers you want to emulate, etc., so you can refer to them at any point in time during the later stages of writing. And so on the left, this is the actual original proto-violence plot, like the very, very original stuff, way before I started working on it for Spooktober. And so the first 4 paragraphs are the actual overall plot. The rest is just notes on how I wanted the visual novel to feel. Most of this overarching plot made it into the final game. For example, the very ending of the story, I wrote the story climaxes of Deirdre making the bomb and escaping with Pavel. This happens in the final game. So you can see how this is like a very, very sparse skeleton for the story that I'd write later on. Next up is the outlining stage, where I add the metaphorical meat to the bones of my story. This is where I take my plot and flesh it out as a series of scenes. These scenes are detailed breakdowns of key story moments. These scenes are also all bullet points, no formal writing, just streams of ideas. This allows me to have quick fixes if an idea doesn't work later on. I also split my plot into an odd number of parts. I find working with odd numbers makes it easier to plan the climactic parts of my plot. Again, there's no formal writing at this stage. Don't worry about anything to do with sentence quality, character quality, any of that sort of thing. Just get stuff down on the page. And you can see on the right, this is an excerpt from Proto-Violence's detailed plot outline. I separated it into 7 parts, 5 meetings, as well as an intro and ending sequence. This meant that, because I was going by my odd-numbered structure for scenes, that whatever would happen in the 4th scene or the 4th part of my story would be the first major climax. And it was, if you've played the visual novel. If you haven't, then it's free on Steam. Go play it. Next up is the drafting stage. So this is when I actually go about making my story script. So here I take my scene notes and turn them into a script. For my script writing, I use Scrivener, but you can use any word processor for this stage, like Google Docs or Microsoft Word. I also write my script as though I were coding it in RenPy. This simplifies the implementation process later on. For example, I include open brackets W, close brackets after full stops to give my sentences pacing. At this stage, I focus on putting my dialogue down on the page and nothing else. I save editing and refining that for later drafts. This is just about getting the story on the page and just getting something there that you can work with. If I'm stuck with a section, I put a summary of what I want to say in blue square brackets and leave it. This maintains my momentum with writing. So I also give myself a time limit for working on the first draft of any sort of script or piece of writing that I'm doing. So for example, with Proto-Violence, since I had to build the original game with my team in about a month, I gave myself a week to make the entire first draft with my team so that I'd have time to edit it and refine it into a much more solid story. And you can see on the left here that this is part of Proto-Violence's first draft. I should also mention I write all of my scripts in Comic Sans. It helps me remind myself that I don't need to take my writing all that seriously yet, and I really like this tip. I found it somewhere on Tumblr, and I really recommend it. Next up is the redrafting stage, where I go about making my story better. When I finish a draft, I leave it alone before starting the next draft. This helps me distance myself from my work, which makes editing easier when I come back. In Proto-Violence's case, I set aside the first draft for a day and focused on other work for the game. I also give my draft to 2 to 3 people, usually editors or people I'm close with, and I ask for their honest thoughts. This helps me learn what to focus on for the next draft. So Like if I ask specific questions as well, I'm more likely to receive constructive critique. So I'm also honest about what worries I have with this first draft. Some questions I've asked are stuff like, how do you find the pacing? What's your impression of this character? Or is the information in this story consistent? Once I've gathered enough feedback, I start the next draft. How much is enough? For me, it's when my chosen readers notice repeat issues with my story. That way, I can use my next draft to fix said issues. And finally, I write 3 drafts per project. The first is for getting my story on a page. The second is for refining my writing. And the third is for adding additional flourishes. Any more, and I never get my story out. Better complete than perfect. I also think now's the time for me to mention that in the second draft, this is when I typically fill in the blanks of the scenes I square bracketed in the first draft. I also use my second draft for like any sort of consistency checks. Like if there are any issues with like timeline stuff or any details I wrote, this would be when I would check them. And so finally, there's the polishing stage when I actually implement and tweak my story into the game engine I'm using. Once I'm done with my third draft, I import my story into my game. Since I use RenPy, I use pass-by-references to RenPy converter to turn my written story into RenPy code. While this converter simplifies writing implementation for RenPy, it's not a silver bullet solution. I always review and edit the code once the converter is finished because it has this odd habit of cutting mid-sentence or like longer sentences. So if you have like, I highly recommend if you're using this tool to just look through the code even after it spits out like the RenPy code. Also, if you're using Unity instead of RenPy for your main engine, I suggest putting your scripting work in Ink, which is a free narrative scripting language, and then importing that into Unity using this free Ink to Unity script converter that you can find on the Unity asset store. After that, I make a final editing pass, reading over my dialogue, adding pauses for emphasis, checking my grammar is consistent, etc. This is when I really just add the final details to my story. Finally, I send my script to my editors for one last review. I make final tweaks based on their suggestions. And you can see right here that this is the final proto-violent script in Sublime Text. Notice all the changes from the first draft, especially in the prose. And then I'm done. And that's my own writing process. Now, there's a second part to this presentation. I've talked a lot about writing on your own. But what if you want to write in a writing team? This requires a little bit of a different skill set. So I'm going to go over that now, the advantages and disadvantages of having a writing team. So what's going to be right for you? Let's talk about solo writing first. The pros of solo writing are that you have full control over your story, from time management to creative decisions. And you can also improve your writing skills, building your confidence for future projects. On the other hand, you will have a heavier workload, because you'll be responsible for everything. And it'll also be harder for you to come up with innovative ideas, especially if you haven't read much to begin with. On the other hand, with team writing, it'll be easier for you to write larger stories when you have other people working with you, because you can assign different parts of your overall story to your writing team. You'll also be able to bounce off ideas off of each other, making your story stronger as a whole, because you'll be having their ideas and your ideas meshing together to create something even more elaborate. On the other hand, the cons to team writing are that you'll have less creative control over your story, which might lead to stylistic inconsistencies. I'm going to give a couple of tips later on how to make sure that doesn't happen as much as possible, but it can happen nonetheless. And there'll also be more coordination required. You and your team have to stay connected throughout development if you want your story to get finished. If you want my personal recommendation on where to begin if you're starting out with making visual novels, I personally recommend starting solo with a tiny game jam project. This will help you get a sense of what writing for visual novels is like, as well as project management skills. Once you've made a few games on your own, you can apply your writing and project management skills to managing a writing team. That is what I did. So let's say you do want to have a writing team. Where do you even start? You should start searching after you've made your detailed story outline. That way you can have more creative control over your story and team. What specifically? Well, you know how your story's plot will go, so you don't need to leave that up to your writing team. It will be easier for you to see whether a writer is a stylistic fit for your story. And you can get to know your teammates and their work styles before development starts. Next up, you should make a recruitment form. This will allow you to gather and review your team candidates all at once. In your recruitment form, you should be transparent. Talk about what style of writing you want, a basic story blurb, and any disturbing subjects that your work will contain. The more specific your recruitment form is, the more likely you'll get writers that fit your criteria. You should also ask for writing samples and work history. This tip sounds obvious, but it's the best way to check if a writer is a good fit for your project or not. You should also have a strict deadline for your recruitment form. If you're recruiting for an upcoming game jam, for example, you should make the application period last about a week so you can have enough time to gather teammates and then incorporate them into your Discord before the game jam begins. Finally, you should share your recruitment form on social media, on forums, and/or Discord servers. I'll give you a few suggestions right now. This will help you get as large of an applicant pool as possible. So here's some places to recruit your team. There's the itch.io community, especially its game jam subcommunities, which get really popular once a game jam is in the running to start soon, because everyone will be like, oh, I'm a writer looking for a team, stuff like that. That would be it's a great way to look for potential team members. There's the DevTalk Discord server, which also has a dedicated place for people in game jams partnering up together. This place also has a dedicated recruitment channel specifically for that. And then there's the Lemasoft forums, which is an oldie but a goldie. It hosts a subforum for writers seeking work. And now here are a couple of tips on working with your writing team for getting the best possible results. So you should assign story parts that play to your team members' writing strengths. When I was working on Proto-Violence, I incorporated 3 other major writers into my writing team. And each one of them I picked based on their specific writing strengths. So I assigned one writer to Deirdre's diary entries and her conversations with Dr. Tsai. There was another writer where I got them to work on the horrifying scenes later on between Pavel and Deirdre. And because they were really good in their previous work at writing emotional yet horrifying scenes. And then there was another writer that I assigned to doing all the case study reports and helping me with the opening and ending of the story. So that's a good way to divide up the work to your writers. You should keep in contact with your writers throughout development. This is especially important when you're making big changes to your writing so that everyone can stay in the loop. I also say that using messaging clients like Discord is way better than using stuff like email. That way you can have a quicker response time with your team members. Also, if something happens to one of your other team members in the writing team, everyone else can adjust quickly. You should always track your team members' progress throughout development. I do this with a Kanban board, which is a form of visual tracking, specifically Trello. I can send this to my teammates so they can update their progress on their own, and so that I can have a bird's eye view of my own project. Once a draft is done, you should edit it yourself for errors in stylistic consistency, if you want stylistic consistency. I say by yourself so that you can have maximum creative control over your work, but if you are struggling with working on your own, then I would also recommend recruiting an editor to your team to help you if the workload is too overwhelming for you. If you're stuck on something, tell your writing team members. If you need help with a part of your story and you don't know how to go about it, or you're worried about a draft deadline, tell them, because more often than not, they'll be able to provide help and resources to help you achieve that goal. That was what happened with me during Proto-Violence, because I got stuck on a lot of places while writing it. And through asking my team members for help, I was able to get the full script done. When it comes to crediting, you should always ask your team members how they should be credited on the project, because sometimes the credit they want is different from what you think it is. This will honestly apply to any kind of team member you're working with, but I figured I'd mention it for the writing team too. And finally, above all else, respect your team members and the creative contributions. When working with others, being considerate goes a long way. It builds trust between you and your teammates and opens up the possibility for future collaborations with them. This is why being nice to them is key. So yes, thank you for listening to me. And I'm now open for any questions that you may have to ask about anything I said. So if you have anything, please let me know.
All right. or someone's already pre-typed a long question here. All right. As an editor slash artist director, blah, 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 what's the best way to represent ideas like, let's cut this dialogue block you're really proud of and absolutely love because we can convey this better with purely a visual part of the visual novel without my writer wanting to take punitive action to my face? Well, even if you can only save my eyes, I'll take it.
I think being transparent with your writer is the most important thing here, because I've been in many situations as both an artist and a writer where I have had to kill my darlings, in effect. Like there was this like block of dialogue that I really, really wanted to keep in, but I realized, oh, images would just suffice. So I think just having a proper conversation with them and being transparent about why you're making the decision you are is the best way forward, so that you can just both be on the same page of why you're making that overall decision. That's how I would go about it anyways.
Cool. Someone's asking, the part where you come up with ideas together as a team, often before an outline, do you have any experiences and thoughts about that?
By could you repeat that question?
They're asking about the experience of coming up with ideas together as a team before an outline. Do you have experience with that?
Um, no, so actually like no, I don't, because generally speaking, when I pitch a lot of my visual novel projects, I have an idea of where I want my story to go in the first place. Like I have a basic idea. But hypothetically, if I were to go like and work on an outline with my team members, I would kind of have I would like form a meeting immediately with them, and we would come up with like some sort of like outline structure to we would basically like pitch together and say like I want to do have this happen in my story, or I want that to have happen in my story. And once we're all parties in the writing team are satisfied with what we have as a final outline, we'll move forward. But I'm going to be honest, you're probably going to have to ask someone who has more experience with the outlining thing, because I come into a lot of my projects with a idea of what kind of story I want to tell.
All right. So someone has a question. I have a lot of trouble separating the draft process and the polish process as far as coding goes. It is more difficult for me to figure out what to write next when I can't refer to how the characters look, where they are on screen, how they're moving, etc. at a given time. Do you have any tips for that?
For reference, for like how to it's like separating the draft from the scripting thing. I think for me, like keeping a reference folder or keeping like a little bible of like how you want your characters to look or how you want them to behave, or like notes on like one thing I do when I'm writing my earlier drafts of my scripts and stuff is that I'll also include like stage cues for like what I want the character to do, so that I can have a sense of when I get to like the art or scripting side of things with my writing, I can have a sense of like what exactly I want to do during those drafts. And it's also why like with a lot of my later visual novels, I tend to do the visual side of things a little later than the writing side of things, because when I do the writing side of when I do the writing side of things, I just want to get the story out of the way. I have like a sense of how my characters like will talk and behave as like people, and then I can like build my art around that. But I'm also speaking from the position as someone who does both the art and a lot of the writing in my visual novels too. So it might be different for you.
All right. And I think we're coming up on time. So thank you so much.
Mhm.
Talk.
Thank you.
All right. And I'm sure there's more questions in the chat. You guys can just keep talking. Next person up is Yasmin. You can get your slides set up and everything. Yeah, access. Hmm. Let me see if I can ping them. Oh, they're on there. Hold on.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, yep.
Okay. Apologies, my microphone likes to switch around a bit, so let me pull up the slides. Share.
All right. Okay, I see your slides. It's all yours.